Imagine your phone dies, your Wi-Fi vanishes, and someone drops you into 14th century England with nothing but the clothes on your back. No hot shower, no clean water on demand, no fridge, no antibiotics. No, I'll just DoorDash dinner and pretend life is fine. You are now living in a world where comfort is a rumor and survival is a full-time job. Welcome to Medieval Manuscript. And if you think the language barrier is just a cute little inconvenience, no, it is a survival problem. You do not stroll into 14th century England speaking modern English like some time-traveling influencer. Dialects shift hard from county to county. Latin dominates records. French still hangs around in law and elite circles. And most people are not sitting around waiting to help you decode your panic. You ask for water, and you may get a stare, a shrug, or the wrong bucket. Congratulations, you have entered the original customer service nightmare. The first thing you notice is that medieval life is not simple. It is exhausting. Every day is a chain of chores just to avoid becoming a statistic. Water has to be fetched. Fuel has to be gathered. Food has to be stretched. Clothes have to be patched. Waste has to be managed badly, because sanitation is basically a rumor with a shovel. The body is always negotiating with hunger, cold, infection, and fatigue. There is no self-care routine here. There is only did you survive the week. The village. And the food? Let's not romanticize it. Bread is a staple, yes, but it is often coarse, dark, and full of grit from stone-ground flour. Pottage, basically a thick stew, keeps people alive more than it delights them. Meat is not an everyday luxury for most peasants. When it appears, it is often salted, smoked, or preserved because refrigeration does not exist, and spoilage is always lurking like a villain in the background. According to historians of medieval diet, most rural households depended heavily on grains, legumes, vegetables, and whatever they could grow, gather, or bargain for. That sounds wholesome until you remember that whatever they could grow also means whatever the weather did not ruin. Winter is where the whole system starts gaslighting you. The cold. Modern winter is annoying. Medieval winter is a threat. You do not just feel cold. You feel cold in your bones, in your teeth, in your joints, in the damp straw under your body. Houses are poorly insulated. Glass windows are rare and expensive. Drafts slip through every crack like they pay rent. People layer wool, linen, and whatever else they can afford because staying warm is not about comfort. It is about not dying. And yes, the body pays for it. Cold stress weakens you. Hunger makes it worse. Illness spreads faster when people are crowded together and underfed. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 hit Northern Europe hard, and England was not spared the misery. Crop failures, rain, and cold turned food into a luxury. Chroniclers described a world where people were desperate enough to eat poor substitutes and where death followed hunger like a shadow. This is not a rough season. This is a system failure. Women and children take the hit first and hardest because medieval survival is brutally unequal. Women are expected to work, bear children, manage households, and keep the whole machine from collapsing while having very little control over the machine itself. Childbirth is dangerous. Infant mortality is high. Historians estimate that a large share of children did not survive to adulthood, and for mothers, pregnancy and delivery could become a death sentence in a world with no modern obstetrics, no antiseptics, and no emergency care. You do not get a dramatic hospital montage. You get pain, blood, fever, and prayer. The children. If you are a child in 14th century England, your life is not a protected little bubble. You work early. You are vulnerable to disease, malnutrition, accidents, and neglect. A child can be useful labor before they are fully grown, which is a grim way of saying childhood is short and fragile. If you are born into a peasant family, your odds are shaped by harvests, weather, and whether your parents can keep enough food on the table to stop your body from folding in on itself. And disease? Disease is everywhere. Smallpox, dysentery, typhus, and other infections move through communities with ugly efficiency. Clean water is not guaranteed. Waste disposal is poor. Medical knowledge is limited. People understand some practical things, herbs, rest, bleeding, diet, but they do not have germ theory. They cannot see the enemy, so they blame bad air, imbalance, divine punishment, or whatever explanation is available that week. It is medieval medicine, which means half science, half superstition, and all of it delivered with confidence. The women. For women, the danger is not just childbirth. It is the whole structure of life. Marriage is often economic, not romantic. Work is relentless. A woman may be spinning, brewing, baking, tending animals, caring for children, and helping with harvest labor all in the same week. If she is poor, she has fewer choices and more exposure to violence, hunger, and exhaustion. If she is wealthy, she may have better food and shelter, but she is still trapped inside a world where her body is monitored, judged, and used as a vessel for heirs and alliances. And if you think the law is going to protect her, cute. Medieval law is not your friend. It is a blunt instrument with a seal on it. The serfs. Now let's talk about the people doing the actual grinding. Serfs and peasants. They are tied to land, obligations, rents, labor services, and the whims of local power. You do not just quit medieval life and move to a better neighborhood. Your labor is owed. Your harvest is taxed. Your time is not fully yours. If the Lord wants work, you work. If the harvest fails, you still owe. If the weather turns ugly, too bad. The system does not care that your stomach is empty. It cares that the rent is due. This is where the whole thing gets extra bleak, because hunger is not just a natural disaster. It is political. It is social. It is enforced. A bad harvest can ruin you, but so can the obligations stacked on top of it. You are not only fighting the weather, you are fighting the structure. And then there is the law, which in medieval England can feel less like justice and more like a trap with paperwork. The law is worse than the hunger. You wake up in a warm bed, reach for clean water, and maybe complain that your phone charger is too short. Medieval you wakes up in a room that smells like damp wool, smoke, old sweat, and whatever died under the floorboards last winter. No thermostat, no antibiotics, no emergency room, just a body, a bad roof, and a world that thinks good enough is a luxury brand. Welcome to Medieval Manuscript. Now, if you think the law is going to save you, that is adorable. Medieval justice is not a sleek system with appeals and body cams. It is a loud, local, deeply personal mess. There is no police force in the modern sense. There are watchmen, bailiffs, sheriffs, constables, and a whole lot of neighbors yelling hue and cry when something goes wrong. That means if a crime happens, the community is supposed to shout, chase, and point fingers like a village-wide Karen convention. If nobody catches the culprit, well, good luck. The system has the emotional maturity of a brick. And when the law does catch you, it often does not care whether you are guilty in any modern sense. Medieval courts lean hard on ordeal, oath, reputation, and whatever the local power structure feels like that day. Trial by ordeal was used in parts of medieval Europe, though it declined after the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 discouraged clergy from participating. In plain English, if the authorities wanted a divine coin flip, they could still find a way to make your skin, your bones, or your panic do the talking. The dungeon is not some gothic movie set with tasteful candlelight and a brooding soundtrack. It is cold stone, stale air, rats, and the kind of darkness that feels wet. Prisoners could be chained, starved, or simply left to rot while the legal machine ground on. In some places, the punishment was the point. In others, the waiting was the punishment. Either way, your body becomes a storage problem. And if you are thinking, surely there must be standards, no. Medieval standards are often just different flavors of misery. The Tower of London had cells. So did castles, monasteries, and civic buildings. Some were barely rooms. Some were pits. Some were so cramped that standing, sitting, and lying down all became arguments with your own joints. The body does not care about noble architecture. It cares about oxygen, water, and not being treated like a sack of spoiled grain. Poison in the plate. Here is the fun part. Even the rich are not safe. They just get poisoned with better tableware. Medieval elites loved fancy food, but fancy did not mean safe. Lead-glazed pottery and pewter vessels could leach lead into food and drink, especially with acidic ingredients. Lead poisoning is not a cute little inconvenience. It can damage the nervous system, cause abdominal pain, fatigue, infertility, and in severe cases seizures or death. Modern medicine knows this because bodies do not lie, even when history tries to dress them up in velvet. And then there is the broader problem of food safety. Without refrigeration, without modern sanitation, And without a real understanding of microbes, food can turn on you fast. Meat spoils. Water carries disease. Bread can be contaminated. Wine can be adulterated. The wealthy may eat more often and eat better, but they are still one bad batch away from a very humiliating exit. Some historians have also pointed to ergot poisoning from rye contaminated by the fungus Claviceps purpurea, which can cause hallucinations, burning sensations, muscle cramps, nausea, and gangrene-like symptoms. That is not a medieval urban legend. That is a real biological disaster hiding in a loaf of bread. Imagine sitting down for dinner and your meal decides to become a chemical ambush. Absolute nightmare behavior. So yes, the Lord gets a silver cup. The peasant gets a wooden bowl. But both can still end up with a body full of toxins and a very bad night. Winter. Winter in medieval Europe is not a cozy season of blankets and hot drinks. It is a survival test with frostbite as the host. Houses are drafty. Windows are small or covered. Insulation is limited. Smoke from open fires hangs in the air because ventilation is poor and nobody has invented the modern miracle of not choking on your own heating system. People do what they can. They layer clothing. They huddle. They store grain, salt meat, dried fish, beans, peas, and whatever else can survive the cold months. According to historical studies of medieval diet and household economy, preservation methods like salting, smoking, drying, pickling, and brining were essential because winter did not care about your appetite. If the harvest was poor, the pantry became a countdown timer. And when food runs low, the body starts making desperate choices. First comes weakness, then irritability, then illness, then the kind of hunger that makes every thought feel slow and sticky. Malnutrition weakens the immune system, which means infections hit harder and recoveries take longer. In a world without modern medicine, that is not a side effect. That is the trap. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 is the classic example of how fast things can collapse. Heavy rains, crop failure, and rising food prices turned survival into a lottery. Chroniclers described people eating whatever they could find, and mortality rose sharply across parts of Europe. When the food chain breaks, the poor do not get a backup plan. They get thinner, sicker, and easier to bury. Housing. Let's talk about the house, because home is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. For many people, medieval housing is cramped, smoky, and shared with animals, or at least with the smell of them. Floors may be packed earth. Walls may be timber, wattle, and daub, or stone if you are lucky and rich enough to pay for the privilege of not freezing like a forgotten turnip. Bedding is reused. Straw gets dirty. Lice and fleas are not guests, they are residents. This matters because housing is health. Poor ventilation spreads smoke and respiratory irritation. Dampness encourages mold and illness. Crowding helps infections move from one body to the next like gossip at a feast. There is no central heating, no insulation standard, no public health inspector knocking on the door with a clipboard and a face full of disappointment. And if you are wealthy, congratulations, your house is bigger. It is still not clean by modern standards. Large halls, servants, animals, food prep, and waste all create their own ecosystem of filth. Time slip for a second. You are standing in a medieval hall, and the water on the table is whatever the household could scrape together from a ditch, a barrel, or a prayer. Now fast forward to your kitchen sink, where clean water comes out like it pays rent. That tiny miracle is already winning. Welcome to Medieval Manuscript. The poison nobody sees. Here is the nasty little twist. Medieval people did not always die from one dramatic wound. Sometimes the body got quietly mugged over months or years. Lead was one of the biggest villains. It showed up in glazed pottery, pewter vessels, cosmetics, pigments, and even some wine-related practices. The problem is simple and rude. Lead does not belong in your body, but once it gets in, it can mess with the brain, the gut, the blood, and the nerves. Modern medicine knows lead exposure can cause abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue, irritability, learning problems in children, and long-term damage to the nervous system. According to the CDC, there is no safe level of lead in children's blood. Medieval people did not have that warning label. They had vibes. Bad vibes. Lead poisoning was especially cruel because it could look like ordinary misery at first. Headaches, belly pain, weakness, confusion. Then the body starts acting like a machine with sand in the gears. In severe cases, seizures and coma can happen. Chronic exposure can also harm fertility and development. The bread that fights back. Now let's talk about ergot, because medieval bread sometimes came with a side of hallucination and regret. Ergot is a fungus that can infect rye and other grains. When contaminated grain is milled into flour and baked into bread, the toxins can survive. The result is ergotism, sometimes called St. Anthony's fire. Historical accounts describe burning pain, muscle cramps, nausea, vomiting, tingling, hallucinations, and in severe cases, gangrene-like tissue damage. The blood vessels can constrict so badly that fingers, toes, or whole limbs lose circulation. That is how you end up with a body part acting like it has resigned from the job. The symptoms could be terrifying enough to look supernatural. People saw visions, felt their skin burn, and watched flesh darken and die. And because medieval diets often depended heavily on grain, one bad harvest or one damp storage season could turn a staple food into a biological prank from hell. The body does not care that bread is sacred. The fungus certainly does not. The dancing plague. Then there is the weird one. The one that sounds like a joke until you read the records. In places like Strasbourg in 1518, chroniclers described groups of people dancing uncontrollably for days or weeks. This is often called the dancing plague or dancing mania. Historians still debate the exact causes, but the event is real, and the explanations likely involve a mix of stress, social contagion, exhaustion, and possibly ergot exposure in some cases. In a world already crushed by famine, fear, disease, and religious pressure, the human nervous system can snap in spectacular ways. Think about that for a second. Your body is already running on fumes, your sleep is wrecked, your food is questionable, and then your brain decides to throw a full-body rave without asking permission. Medieval chroniclers described people collapsing from exhaustion, pain, and sheer inability to stop moving. That is not a dance trend. That is a breakdown. Modern medicine would not call this possession first. It would look for neurological, psychological, toxic, and environmental causes. But medieval people did not have that toolkit. They had priests, rumors, fear, and a front-row seat to human suffering. Survival tips, medieval edition. If you were trying to survive this mess, your options were grim, but not zero. Use the cleanest water you can find. Boiled water is safer than raw water when contamination is a risk. Medieval people did boil water for some uses, though not with modern consistency. If you are in a survival setting, heat matters. Store grain dry and inspect it carefully. Moist grain is fungus-friendly. Ergot thrives when crops are damaged and storage is poor. Dry storage reduces risk. Diversify food sources. A diet built on one grain is a disaster waiting to happen. Mixing in legumes, dairy, fish, vegetables, and preserved foods lowers the chance that one contaminated batch ruins everything. Avoid suspicious cookware and cosmetics. If a vessel, glaze, pigment, or cosmetic contains lead, do not use it. In modern terms, if it is not food safe, it is not worth the gamble. Watch for clusters. If multiple people in the same household get sick after the same meal, think contamination, not bad luck. That is the body's version of a group chat warning. Warning signs you should not ignore. If this were happening today, the red flags would be obvious enough to make even a medieval monk drop his candle. Seek medical help if you notice. Severe abdominal pain, repeated vomiting, confusion or unusual behavior, seizures, weakness or numbness, hallucinations, blue, black, or dead-looking skin on fingers or toes, trouble walking or speaking, symptoms affecting several people after the same food or water. These can be signs of poisoning, severe infection, or another emergency. Do not wait for the body to tough it out. That is how people end up in the historical footnotes. When to seek help immediately. Get urgent medical care now if there is. Loss of consciousness, seizure activity, severe dehydration, chest pain, breathing trouble, sudden confusion, signs of tissue death or rapidly worsening pain. If a child may have been exposed to lead, contact a doctor or poison control right away. Children are especially vulnerable because lead can affect brain development. According to the WHO, lead exposure remains a major public health problem worldwide. Darkly witty comfort check. So yes, medieval life could hand you poisoned pottery, cursed grain, and a nervous system that occasionally decided to stage a rebellion in public. Meanwhile, you are sitting in a world with plumbing, food labels, poison control, and the radical luxury of not having to guess whether your bread is trying to kill you. Your clean water is already winning. If you have symptoms or think you may have been exposed to a toxin, seek medical care promptly. Tam Kao Y Kin Bacsi Truoc Kai Ap Dong. Cheers.